For over 64 years, James Bond has saved the world, redefined cool, introduced us to gadgets we still wish existed, and convinced generations that ordering a martini requires at least 3 personality traits and the license to kill. Spy movie fans love James Bond, and why wouldn't we? But has he lost his identity in these 64 years? Hi, this is Dan.
And Tom.
And welcome back to Cracking the Code of Spy Movies, the podcast where we sometimes look past the gun barrels and glamorous myths to understand how spy movies actually work. And today, we're going to decode James Bond's identity crisis.
Wait, you think he's got an identity crisis?
Yeah, since 1962, Bond has fought megalomaniacs, destroyed villain lairs that probably violated several zoning laws, drove cars with more weapons than small countries, and somehow managed to save the world while never spilling his drink.
Well, you can't just spill your drink. Come on.
Nah, but James Bond has changed more in the last 20 years than in the previous 44 years combined, and fans are divided.
Well, let's see what happened 20 years ago. Oh, that's right. Casino Royale came out, bringing us that whole Daniel Craig arc or fork or whatever you want to call his helm as James Bond and what he did to the character. And I agree with you about fans being very divided here. And my guess is that older Bond fans want somebody more like Connery or Moore than whatever Craig did to the character.
Yeah, and I think there is some age-based stuff there because a lot of people say, hey, this is who I grew up with. I grew up with Brosnan. I love Brosnan, whatever. But let's look at some of the things that could impact Bond's identity. Today's Bond bleeds more, cries more, bruises more. So today, we're diving into 3 massive questions. Has realism made Bond less fun? Is modern Bond still James Bond? Or, put another way, did his identity change?
I have a very strong opinion on that one.
And should Bond return to standalone adventures? And throughout this episode, we're going to bounce between classic Bond and evolving Bond to try to take care of this issue. So buckle up and don't worry. We promise whatever we do, we will not press the red button to engage the ejector seat. Okay.
Although that would be fun.
You might press it on us. All right.
All right. So first, we've seen a shift over the years in the James Bond movies based on audience preferences, cinema trends, what sells, quite honestly. Where we used to have James Bond fighting villains inside of volcano bases and escaping laser tables and parachuting off mountains, things are different now. Today's Bond fights in grounded fistfights and emotional breakdowns. But here's the big debate. Did the realism they've added improve Bond, or did it actually remove the escapist fun that made him legendary?
This is the serious question, and we all have an opinion on this one. And so be sure to leave your opinion on our Facebook page. Go to facebook.com/Spy Movie Navigator. We want to know what you think, because Bond fans never hold back, ever.
So and you have to like the fact that James Bond fans are willing to voice their opinions. So let us hear from you.
Yeah. All right, let's look at what has happened. The early 2000s changed spy movies forever. How? With the rise of the more realistic spy movies. Jason Bourne introduced handheld camera fights. You could almost feel every punch.
Yeah, but they overuse those now. I hate that shaky cam stuff.
This is the problem now. And his movies, Bourne movies, also introduced psychological realism. We enter deep into new territories where spies have trauma and feelings. We didn't have to worry about that before. And we got back to anti-gadget espionage. Lasers and satellites that can cut a path through a country? Nah. Espionage. More existential dread.
So now, if you're a fan of our podcast, you know that we tend to love spy movies focused more on espionage than action, where we generally think some action is fine, but it did start getting out of hand.
It did. But did this influence Bond? Yeah. Bond followed suit.
Yeah.
Though Bond never gave up on the gadgets completely, because somewhere deep down, Bond knows audiences love a car that can solve problems with rockets and machine guns. So that didn't all go away. But wow.
Well, a James Bond movie without gadgets wouldn't be a James Bond movie. Gadgets are part of his core, going
Yeah.
all the way back to From Russia with Love and that attaché case. And I'm hearing rumors that going forward, Amazon's going to reduce the number of gadgets. So we'll see how that
Yeah,
plays out.
there are some articles out just today about that kind of stuff. All right, let's take a quick step back and see what classic James Bond delivered. And classic Bond was tremendously successful. Let's keep that in mind. So, classic Bond wasn't meant to be believable. Ian Fleming, in his writings, created a fantasy world for us, and Eon Productions exaggerated that fantasy beyond words with production and storytelling, the likes of which we had not really seen before in spy movies. So forget reality. It was meant to be a spectacle and therefore spectacular. Bond helped us escape from reality and live in and participate in this fantasy world. We love that.
Yeah, but I think it's important to point out that as the Bond movies progressed, we did see more spectacle and then more spectacle, where the first two movies didn't have a lot of spectacle. Right? They
Yeah.
were more grounded. And it wasn't until Goldfinger that we got the Bond movie formula where spectacle became more important.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But even in Dr. No, we got some spectacle with the blowing up of the lair and everything else. I mean, it was there in the beginning. They certainly exaggerated it, and we're saying they exaggerated it. But here are just a few quick examples. Ken Adam villain lairs, the guru.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, come on. He's the guru of production design forever, really. The man on the leading edge whose imagination came to life on the screen for us. And we loved it. We loved it. Ken Adam didn't design sets. Ken Adam designed cinematic playgrounds for chaos and volcano bases, Fort Knox interiors, war rooms that look like global military control centers. He did it all in a bunch of movies beyond James Bond.
Well, that's true. And even in Doctor No, when things started and there wasn't as much spectacle with some of this, even
Yeah,
something basic like that room that Dent goes into and he gets that spider. What a
yeah,
great set.
yeah.
Minimalistic,
Beautiful.
but very, very cool. But then you go into Dr. No's lair and you've got that huge fish tank and stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess set wise, there was some spectacle from the beginning.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, Tom, as you mentioned, we get gadget driven action. We know, starting with Goldfinger, the cars and the gadgets took center stage. They became co stars, really, and were so thoughtfully crafted and executed. The audiences, once again, loved it. Let's be honest, if your car cannot deploy machine guns, oil slicks, and eject annoying passengers, for instance, are you even driving a Bond car? I mean, come
No, and I really want to get my hands on one.
on. Yeah.
I'd
I
love
mean,
an ejector seat.
yeah, we had larger than life villains. We see everyday thugs in the world. James Bond gave us bigger than life villains who had big plans requiring big ideas as to how to combat those plans and stop them. They were a wow factor, again, that we haven't really seen much of before. They wanted world domination, preferably from a comfy chair and that slowly rotates like Blofeld had, but
Well, yeah, and
but what the heck?
and we have
Why
to
not be
remember
comfortable?
we have to remember that in the non-Neon Productions James Bond movie, Never Say Never Again, which was a remake of Thunderball, Largo makes him play a game called Domination. I mean,
Yeah, there you go.
right, hits you right in the face.
Boom.
And it was a very modern video game at the time. So, which essentially it was a gadget. We have a larger than life villain and larger than life gadget. Yes, it wasn't Neon Productions, but you talk about domination. It was in
Yeah.
the name of the game.
Yeah. Reality? Nah. Who cared? The Bond stories on screen actually competed with reality because he lived in the realm and world of imagination. That was the important thing. Imagination was the challenge. Imagination was the limit. And the early Bond movies with the likes of writer Richard Maybaum, Ken Adam, and awesome directors and producers, they enjoyed cocktails floating on a pool of imagination. I mean, it was awesome. That kind of stuff was just terrific, and we loved it.
Now, to be fair, we had many doses of realism. I mean, we're not saying nothing was realistic or based on realism.
Of course not.
You think about the car scene from the airport in Jamaica. Very, very realistic. Even the classic Bond movies had these doses of realism. There was a Cold War going on. There were tensions in the world between the East and the West. There was real spying going on. And we saw it in the news sometimes.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Like when the U.S. U-2 spy plane was shot down over the Soviet Union on May 1st, 1960. It was piloted by CIA civilian Francis Gary Power, who was captured, tried for espionage, and later exchanged in 1962. So the Bond movies really fed off of reality and enhanced the fantasy, though. That was the part that people loved. Yeah, you got to base it on something real, or else there's no grounding, there's nothing. But as the decades passed, realism became more real in spy movies, particularly Bond movies.
Well, and I also think fantasy became more fantastical. Kind
Yeah.
of had both ends. Think about Moonraker. You had both ends in a movie like that.
Yeah, everything can be overdone. But so we're flipping now to modern Bond movies. Modern Bond movies added emotional depth. We saw some of the emotional side of Bond in the earlier Bond movies, like in Doctor No when Coral was killed. You saw that a little bit, or Bond's sadness when Tilly Masterson gets killed in Goldfinger, or when Tracy is murdered, of course, in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and Timothy Dalton's Bond getting angry when Saunders is killed in The Living Daylights, or him going rogue in License to Kill to avenge the maiming of Felix Leiter and the killing of his new bride. But those were more or less glimpses, not dominant.
Now, the interesting thing to me for that is that we don't think of Bond as very emotional until Daniel Craig. But you just listed off a bunch of places where he
Yeah.
did show emotion and you don't dwell on it.
Well, yeah, exactly that. It wasn't dominant. They didn't dwell on it. So you look at Craig's Bond, emotions run wild. And that takes us a bit out of our fantasy world. So yeah, it's the same. Like we're talking about Craig. Yeah, we always appreciated Bond casting, but with the Craig Bond movies, the emotions came with their own supporting cast. I mean, it's like, yikes, a little over the top. But all right. Now, the modern Bond also has higher narrative stakes. The emotion, the physical vulnerability, the reality became part of the narrative, the new narrative. Some of Craig's Bond movies were the most successful ever of any Bond movie. Skyfall grossed $1.1 billion. So the new narrative worked in terms of the movies making money. And that counts.
That is the production company's goal, is to make
Yeah.
money.
So
Now, the big question of that, though, is did they make this enormous amount of money because of these changes to his identity, or is it because of the enormous action budgets and stunts that changed the series? Because we have to remember, Mission Impossible gave a dramatic push for more action and bigger stunts, and the
yeah,
James Bond movies followed suit.
yeah.
So, is this an either or, identity versus stunts, or is it some kind of a combination that got these bigger box office numbers? And that's one big thing Amazon's going to have to figure out as they take the series forward.
Yeah, that is a big issue. And the studios, producers, they follow the money. What are people willing to spend money on in a theater? If it's more action and more stunts, more elaborate explosions and action, let's do that because we want their money.
That can also be a double-edged sword because of the cost of all of that.
Right. Well, yeah,
Is
there's
that
costs.
big stunt going to get a payback?
Right. Well, they did okay with the Craig movies in terms of money. They made tons of money with the Craig movies. But Bond now, like you said, with Amazon, they got to figure this out. Bond's at a crossroads. Like you said, Amazon has to figure this out. Bond now stands at a crossroads between fantasy and realism, and audiences, I think they still like to escape, to fantasize. So if Bond leans too far into realism, and that has been the trend, does he risk becoming just another spy thriller? If he leans too far into fantasy, is he risking feeling outdated? So the real question becomes, where should Bond live? In reality or escapism? That's a key question, and it's got to be answered.
Yeah. All right. Now, Dan, we have to remember that really early on in our doing these episodes, we interviewed a guy named Dave Holcomb, and he had that book out that was
Yeah, yeah.
called His World Never Dies, The Evolution of James Bond. And
Yep.
in it, he talked a lot about how Bond would go from reality and then they'd get fantastical and they'd kind of overdo it. And then they'd have to pull back and go more back to reality. And then they drift into fantasy.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
so Craig kind of got rid of the whole fantasy stuff for a while.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
do not envy Amazon, whoever makes the decisions there, because Eon Productions left them one heck of a dilemma.
Yeah, and I think that his whole book, it was a good book. You should check it out if you can. It's available, I'm sure, on Amazon.
Yeah, it's an interesting look at this whole concept of fantasy versus reality
And
and how,
it's also adventure versus espionage, and how spy movies have always gone. Mission Impossible and Bourne influenced it, and so on. And now we got to do more adventure and become more of an adventure movie than an espionage movie. It's like it constantly bounced between those and tried to blend them sometimes, but it was all to make money. It was obviously to make money.
well, that's true.
That's the whole
And
goal.
so we have to answer the question, is the modern Bond still James Bond?
That's the question.
Quite honestly, for me, by No Time to Die, I didn't recognize the character Daniel Craig was playing as James Bond. But over the last 64 years, James Bond has gone from the smooth tuxedo wearing, martini drinking fantasy spy to this bruised, emotionally scarred, deeply human action hero. But here's the question: has Bond evolved with the times, or has he slowly lost the identity that made him iconic in the first place?
Yeah, that's the question. So let's crack the code on whether modern Bond is still 007 or something completely different. And do fans like you who are listening like it? So, as we said up front, we will keep bouncing back to the classic Bond days and the evolution over time. So, let's start with what defined classic Bond. Bond wasn't just a spy, he was an aspirational fantasy. And we have talked about this fantasy in positive terms. The early movies had exotic locations, stylish suits and tuxes, cutting edge gadgets, over the top world class villains, humor and quips carefully mixed with danger, threats, and operations. Cool.
Yeah, so that formula was shaped with Sean Connery's Bond. It evolved, but it really was shaped there. And we had like almost a 40-year run of that. And we as the audience, we weren't just watching espionage. Espionage was important, but we were escaping into the espionage.
That's the key. We were escaping into it. Perfect. Right. Now, remember, James Bond was never supposed to be realistic or even likable, as Fleming said. He was a cinematic wish fulfillment for every male who wanted to be like Bond and every female who wanted to be with Bond. And for the most part, with Sean Connery, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, they embodied this Bond, his style, his panache, his quips and love of the finer things in life, his loyalty to country, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I'd say,
And,
though, that Timothy Dalton kind of broke the mold a little bit. Brosnan brought it back to that because Dalton was much more serious than any other actors to play Bond. And I don't think we would have had Daniel Craig's portrayal of Bond had Timothy Dalton not brought back that serious Bond.
yeah, okay, I think that some of that is true because Dalton, and I like Dalton's Bond. I like Dalton's Bond because it was true to Fleming and how Fleming wrote Bond in terms of attitude and so on. But when Craig took over in Casino Royale, Bond changed dramatically, even further than what Dalton did in terms of tone shift.
That's why I say I don't recognize, especially in the later Craig movies, that character he's playing as James Bond.
Yeah, the whole thing changed, right? The tone shifted with Craig towards emotional vulnerability, serialized storytelling. We didn't see that before. Brutal, tough fight realism, reduced gadget use, and darker psychological stakes. And we're trying to have fun watching these movies. you know, I don't know if I want to be dragged through darker psychological stakes. But anyway, this was what was going on.
Well,
And this was,
if you do watch the movie Black Bag,
yeah. This wasn't just a new actor doing this. It was a new philosophy towards the James Bond world. It was a new Bond. And again, some of his movies are outstanding. Casino Royale was one of the best Bond movies ever made. Skyfall was brilliant as well. But
Yeah,
this was a different
I disagree with you on
storytelling.
Skyfall.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. It's just Craig's second best movie. This was a different storytelling method, though. This was a Bond getting his double O license in Casino to growing old, retiring, coming back, and dying, all in Craig's era.
Yeah,
Yikes!
yeah,
Yeah,
I definitely,
it's a different arc, but this was a different Bond, though. This
yeah.
is like you're saying.
We titled this about, has James Bond lost his identity? Well, he has an identity, but it feels like it's a new identity because there
Yeah.
were very few callbacks to any of the old James Bond identity other than his support team. So this was a new James Bond character, not just a new James Bond actor.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's beyond the actor. And we mentioned in
Well,
Casino
now
Royale.
I'll also say, when did that shift happen? It
Yeah.
wasn't just when we had a new actor. It was when Purvis and Wade really started making waves and started
Well,
influencing these
and some of your
things.
favorite writers, right? Purvis and
My
Wade.
least favorite writers.
All right.
They may be
We met,
great people, right? I don't know them at all. I
yeah.
don't
Right.
like what they did with James Bond.
Yeah. All right. We mentioned Casino Royale, which asked, I think, probably for the first time in our cinematic Bond history, what if James Bond could fail emotionally? That's really the question in Casino Royale. We never faced that really before. We never even doubted that physically he could survive anything. This was part of our built in fantasy we had from 1962. However,
That's true. You always knew that James Bond was going to come up with a way to get through any situation, either by
yeah,
getting help or figuring out a way.
yeah,
And when you just said, what if James Bond could fail emotionally? The one thing that kind of bummed me out about Lazenby not going forward is that I would have loved to have seen his character, his Bond, and take that emotional state of he just lost his wife and goes
yeah,
forward.
yeah.
That
He
would have
should
been
have.
really interesting to see.
Yeah, he should have done more movies. I liked Lazenby. A lot of people fight about it. I like him. I think if he had done a few more movies, he'd be one of the guys we're talking about all the time. All right, so like never before, this whole concept with the shift in Bond in the Craig era, it created a genuine fan divide. So the Craig era is where Bond fans, I think, split. This divide manifests itself every day on our social media pages. As our followers on these pages, they sound off daily on these topics, and
Well,
they
if when
again
you look,
hold nothing back.
yeah, when you look at that, it's tends to be Craig good, Craig bad. But my favorite Bond might have been Sean Connery, or it might have been Roger Moore, whatever. Whoever your first Bond was is probably your favorite from
Yeah.
what we've seen historically. But you don't get this. Oh, I really like Roger Moore and I hate Sean Connery. You get some people saying, I really love Daniel Craig and don't like the other Bonds, or I like the other Bonds and don't like Daniel Craig. He's
Oh yeah,
very dividing.
yeah. I mean, some people have literally said, "Hey, Craig saved the franchise," and others have said, "The franchise lost its fun. Bond is dead." And Craig destroyed Bond and the franchise. Wow.
Yeah, I'm with
So
you. I'm with those folks.
the real points of debate is Bond defined by tone or character? Can Bond survive if it abandons fantasy? And maybe Bond hasn't lost his identity. Maybe Bond is constantly redefining it.
Yeah, but
I don't know.
I think that brings us to the question of how far can James Bond evolve before he stops feeling like James Bond?
There you go.
And it just isn't us fans. Again, Amazon has to figure this out.
Yeah.
And they have to nail it with their first James Bond movie. Or, in my opinion, if they screw that up, the franchise is done.
Yeah. You're looking at the future here of Bond. Amazon must now look at this totality of issues that we're talking about here and decide how to handle it. The James Bond world is on a cusp. What will become of the James Bond we have grown to love and who provided us with an escape that we love to escape to?
Well, they paid billions of dollars to get Bond. So it stands to reason they
Yeah.
want to get their money back. They want to get
Somehow.
this right. And from what I've been reading, they want to bring back some of the old identity.
Yeah, which would be great, I think. And a lot of people are
I
going to
agree with
have
you.
arguments against that too. But one way or another, as the end of No Time to Die stated, Bond will return because, like you said, they paid a lot
Yeah,
of money for this.
that
They
blew
got,
my mind when that came up on the screen. I was looking
yeah,
for it. I'm going like, is that going to come? Because how the heck is he going to return?
yeah, that, yeah. Parenthetically, it said Bond will return, and then in parentheses, we need to make more money. So that's
Or
all it said.
we're out and somebody else is going to have to figure this mess out.
Yeah, I don't know if they knew that then, but anyway, they're out now. That's for sure, Eon. So, but how are they going to make the money? The clever and creative screenplay writers will begin tackling this soon
Well,
for
hopefully,
Amazon,
new
maybe.
writers, yes, yes, new writers, clever writers,
Yeah, yeah.
creative writers, not Purvis and Wade.
I mean, they may have started already. We don't know really. You hear all these different rumors. The first hurdle is what do we do with a dead Bond? Amazon has to
Well, you're not
figure it
going to be able
out.
to do much because with that explosion, there wasn't much of them left.
No, we didn't see his body blowing into pieces, and a lot of people on our pages have said that. It's like, hey, well, we never saw him die. I mean, we never saw Sherlock Holmes die either, and he returned. So there you go. So anyway, Amazon's got to tackle this. Is Bond still alive? If so, how? If not, then what?
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The Great Oz has spoken.
But here it'd be Amazon instead of Oz speaking. Daniel Craig's arc? What? What arc? What? Ignore it. They could just say, hey, we're ignoring that and we're carrying on. We're not paying attention to whether or not Bond died in No Time to Die. We're
Yeah.
ignoring it.
Now, it's easy to ignore it, but as I've said before, if they pull a who killed JR and try to say this was all a dream, I'm walking out of the theater. Or even if you take the last line of No Time to Die, when Madeline tells Mathilde,
Mathilde? Quoi? I'm going to tell you a story. About a man. His name was Bond. James Bond.
if they try some BS that James Bond was just a character from Madeline's imagination and all of the stories so far came from her mind and she's just telling stories to Mathilde, I'm going to lose it.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to do that. And and really, look, I think people can get over if you bring Bond back. They got over bringing Sherlock Holmes back. In fact, they were
Well, yeah,
thrilled.
I think you absolutely can get over bringing him
Right.
back,
And,
but it's how you
and
bring him back.
if fans that get over it quickly, it doesn't matter. You could just say magically it fell into a hole and he was fine. People will get over it and say, okay, fine, you took care of that. Let's go on.
Well, or if they start back with a younger Bond.
Yeah, which they might, they might go back to the 50s. All right, let's get to our next question because the next question is, should Bond return to standalone adventures? We know he's coming back. Amazon's got to make money. So the early Bond movies were simple. They were missions. The mission began, the mission ended. Bond saves the world. We've escaped for a while into this fantasy world. All good. But modern Bond turned into serialized storytelling, long emotional arcs, recurring villains, connected plots. Very different, much more difficult to continue to do that. So today we're asking, did Bond become stronger with continuity, or which again was not Eon's strength, or lose what made him endlessly rewatchable over and over again? It is harder to watch the Craig stuff because it's its own beginning and end of Bond in 5 movies.
And the character does have a different identity.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think in part because of that.
Yeah.
Whether it's you have more time to build that in or whatever, I think he does lose his identity as you do that.
Yeah.
Because to me, there was power with standalone Bond missions. From Dr.
Yeah,
No through the
I agree.
Moore era, Bond movies worked like spy short stories. We didn't have
Yeah.
to see them in order. Once a
Yeah.
bunch of them were out there. We could just watch them because we could jump into any movie, understand what we're looking at. We'd understand the mission, the villain, and the stakes, and we didn't have to rely on history to help us out.
Yeah. And we could argue that this structure made Bond timeless and accessible. At any time, anywhere, you can watch Thunderball and then The Living Daylights, For Your Eyes Only, Goldfinger, in whatever order you wanted. No worries. Easy. Bond was timeless then.
Yeah, then. Because if you fast forward into the Daniel Craig era, and to the general evolution of Bond.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, he evolved and always battled between espionage and action and adventure. He was trying to straddle that fence based on what audiences wanted at the time. I mean, he did evolve, and his
Yeah.
identity
Right.
evolved over time. And we've always argued that Eon Production wasn't really good at continuity from one story to another, but we could live with that. And we laughed about it sometimes.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we
we did.
pointed it out occasionally in podcasts, but we
Yeah.
accepted that as okay. The continuity doesn't have to be strong, but the James Bond identity didn't have a lot of continuity problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the internal continuity of Bond, we knew what he stood for. We knew what he liked in life, the tuxedo, the martinis he drank, and so on. All of that stuff, he was a recognizable guy as Bond, James Bond. When you got to the more or less serialized Bond storytelling from Casino Royale on, to Quantum of Solace, that continuation thing, things changed.
Quantum was a direct continuation
Yeah.
story.
We
the
never
first
saw
time
that
ever.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you got Skyfall, then Spectre, and then No Time to Die. It went in a whole different direction, completely different direction. So,
Well, yeah, because the Craig era introduced this emotional continuity, like I was saying about before, about what would have happened with Lazenby if he had done a second movie because of the emotional trauma of Tracy's death. What would that have done to him as he went forward?
yeah.
But suddenly, Bond isn't a character. He's more of a life story when you get into this continuity stuff,
Yeah.
one continuous story. And it's very different than what we understood before about James Bond. Bond was a commander, and we knew a little history of him,
Yeah.
but now this was a life change unit. This made Bond different than what we knew before with the changes they made with the Craig era here and
Yeah,
the identity of Bond.
There's pros and cons. And there's certainly some pros to it. I mean, you had deeper emotional stakes. You had a strong character arcs and development and all that kind of stuff. There's some of the things we criticized Eon for before, but there certainly are cons.
Yeah, you think? I mean, it's a harder entry point for, you made the comment about how you could jump around between any Bond movie before.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard now to have an entry point for new viewers. It's hard for a new viewer to jump into James Bond by watching Quantum of Solace, or God forbid, if your first James Bond movie was No Time to Die, you have nowhere to go with that character.
Yeah,
And
that's
you
true.
don't know, since it's a continuity based approach and the identity of Bond evolves through that really rapidly, you don't really have a good way to say, I'm going to jump in at Quantum of Solace and have any clue about the stuff that was important because it was continuity from those other movies. Where prior to Craig, you didn't have that.
Yeah, they fundamentally changed the franchise.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to realize today, Amazon is going to look at every piece of data they can about what Bond fans like or don't like, what they'll spend money on, and so on. So data rules the world now. And the future of Bond storytelling is going to be data driven, I'm afraid. We can believe that Amazon will dive deep into this data that's available for modern audiences and what they prefer and all that kind of stuff that we just said. So now what? That's the key.
I would love to see how Amazon uses that data and their analytics to try to figure out how to go forward.
They're going to.
Well, I know. And with my data background, I'd love to see it. Okay, this is the nerd in me. I'd love to see it if they did a video or a white paper or something on how the analytics shaped the direction they eventually chose for James Bond, why they made the decisions based on the data they have. Now, I know that's wishful thinking, but it'd be a great college case study on the use of analytics in entertainment.
Yeah, I don't think Amazon's going to share that with us in any way. But
I know, that's too bad.
but one thing is for certain, as we're saying, as No Time to Die promised us, James Bond will return. There's too much money at stake. They spent almost $8 billion to do this. The only question is, how will he return? Who will return? And what version of Bond will we meet when he does return?
Yeah, what will the new James Bond identity be for us, the fans? It's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, and streaming has changed things too. I mean, probably the majority of streaming viewers love serialized storytelling, and there are plenty of wannabe franchises in the making, or at least attempts at that on the streaming channels in all genres, including the spy genre.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and there have been a few of these that have worked, and
mm,
most of them are serialized series.
yeah,
So you've got Slow Horses, The Recruit, The Night Agent, Citadel as a
yeah,
few that are streaming series that were successful.
yeah,
But the big budget movies that they brought to streaming that they were telling us were going to become series haven't come to fruition, in part because either their money's wrong there or the people who created that stuff are off doing other things. And I'm thinking of Red Notice, Operation Fortune, The Gray Man, Argyle, The
yeah,
Union.
yeah,
I mean, all
yeah,
of these things were supposed to be stepping stones to a series of movies as opposed to a streaming series the way we think of it.
yeah. Want to be
And
franchises?
and to me, this is a danger zone for James Bond because they're not likely to be doing the, oh, we're going to put out 8 of these things in a year and have them go, week by week. The only benefit Bond has here is that he is an established franchise. But it does worry me when you look at what's happening in streaming that the serialized stuff seems to be working and the standalone movie things aren't turning into a series of standalone movies.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that drives this is that the franchises really often thrive on accessibility. So you have some of the successful series shows because it's available whenever the audience wants to consume it. That is a big key here. And one of the things that drives this whole serialization concept is that, hey, I could watch this anytime I want, and I could binge on this stuff all week if I want to, or I could watch one a week. I could do whatever the heck I want. I could watch it whenever I want and consume it whenever I want. So that's going to drive some decisions, I think, for Amazon in terms of how they manage the entirety of Bond, whether they do standalone movies with standalone missions or they serialize some stuff as well. So we don't know. Now,
Now, that's actually a little bit different than the whole identity conversation we're having here. So I
yeah,
think let's go ahead and bring it back into the identity piece because that's some of the struggles they're going to have and what they're going to do with delivery. But the identity of Bond's going to be really important here.
yeah, but it is going to it does impact the identity too, even if you serialize it, because it changes the character a little bit. Now, so which Bond do you prefer? Because Bond began as a mission-based character, and now he's becoming a saga-based character. Bond once flirted with danger. Now he suffers through it.
So
These are differences.
which of these identities is going to help keep 007 alive longer as an entertainment value for us? Is James Bond still aspirational or is he now relatable? And which matters more? I mean, for me, I liked it when he was something different. He wasn't, I couldn't really relate to him that much. So
Yeah.
is
We
Bond
just
better?
wanted to be him. We
Yeah,
didn't want to relate to, all the personal stuff. That, yeah,
yeah,
fantasy.
yeah. But is Bond better being realistic like Craig, or should he return to full fantasy? And Roger Moore got it very fantastical.
Mm.
And should it be mission based or saga based? Which of these identities and which of these traits are going to shape the identity of Bond into the next thing we see?
Yeah, and we mentioned every Bond era reflects these generational expectations. So you got to ask, are older Bond fans protecting nostalgia while younger Bond fans want realism? Should Bond reinvent itself every generation or maintain tradition? Or is Bond trying to satisfy too many audiences simultaneously? And one last big question.
Well, actually, that's an interesting question because if you look at it, there's not been a franchise out in the entertainment industry that's lasted this long through this number of generations.
Yeah, that's true.
And as people change and people evolve, they have to evolve, but you run the risk of alienating your original fans.
Yeah. I mean, certainly Eon changed things over the decades with Bond and how the Bond stories unfolded. They had to for lots of reasons, different things happening in the world, Cold War ending, kind of, and all that kind of stuff. But they fundamentally kept the basics of Bond. I know you're going to say till they got the correct, but fundamentally,
I
that's what
just
they
bit my tongue.
fundamentally that's what they did. So one last big question is Bond still primarily a spy or now just an elite soldier? What is his identity to you? Has his identity been lost? I mean, if he just morphs into this action hero, Okay, that's different than what we know from Bond. All right, join us on Facebook and continue this debate. These are big questions, the answer to which must be developed in short order. Will the modern data alter Bond forever? All right, before we end this conversation, we want to give a shout out to Pietro Rossi, who gave us feedback on our Spy versus Spy, How a Mad Magazine Comic Shaped Spy Cinema episode. He loved it. He said it was a clever, interesting podcast, brought back many happy memories. All right, thank you, Pietro.
Yeah, thank you, Pietro. And I'm with him. It did bring back some really happy memories.
Yeah. All right. So now here we are back to Bond and his identity. The tight wire act is happening right now. And there's no safety net here. All right. That's a wrap or unwrap of the James Bond identity crisis. This has been Dan.
And Tom.
Subscribe to our show, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies, right now. That helps us out a lot. Do it. And until next time, keep decoding spy movies with us. And remember, the world may change, the movies may change, but somewhere, Bond is still ordering a martini and judging you if you order it wrong. Cheers to all. Subscribe to our show. Thanks for listening. And so that's a wrap.